Today, we are welcoming back to Blooming Curious for the second time, Jessica Vance. Jessica is a passionate inquiry educator and author, and today we're going to talk about her second and latest publication, Evidence of Inquiry, a hands-on guide to making learning visible and building a culture of inquiry through learning walls. And Jess, I bet that says exactly what it does on the can. So welcome back, Jessica. And it's just wonderful to have you here again and to talk about inquiry and, of course, this latest book of yours. So congratulations on this publication.
Thank you so much, Edwina. It's good to be back. I can't believe it's almost been a full year since I got to see you in person.
I know.
It does. And being on the podcast before I was writing the book, and we were talking about floor books and some other parts that nobody else around the world was privy to then, even you. So getting to have this book out in print and then reconnecting with you is really special. So thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's such a pleasure. I can't wait to sort of dig into it. And it's something that I've been talking about even on the podcast quite a bit, is learning walls and also the differences. But I'm hoping you're going to dip into that between a learning wall and a wonder wall, which I see a lot of when I go into classrooms. So let's talk about the title, which is really powerful. Can you unpack that a little bit, and also why you felt that this book had to be written now? Obviously, you've been writing it for a while, but it's just been published. What were your thoughts behind that?
So really the book, and if you open up the first Roots of Wonderings, I talk about how and why this book came about. And really it's from my learners, the adults, whether they be physically with me or those on social media, asking questions about my own documentation process that I was tinkering with and playing with. How do you do that? Where do you put that artifact? And the more questions that I got, the more patterns and trends that I saw that this was an opportunity or just something that people were really curious about. So just as all good inquiry educators do, you follow your learners' questions, which I thought would be a very simple, small book. It started off with the sketch note, How to Build a Learning Wall. I had my amazing illustrator, Ryan Bear, put that together, and I started utilizing that with schools and with coaching. And so I thought this would be easy peasy. I'll write a chapter on each of these steps. And then a year and a half later, I found myself knee deep in so much research and some really great connections with other educators, tinkering with some of these ideas, which you see in part 3 of the publication. And so I think that's a little bit of the why. And when I go back to look at my first publication, Leading with a Lens of Inquiry, there's a very early stages of some learning walls there. And to see that, and then now to see what it's progressed to, and what I see people doing with an authentic documentation process, my goodness gracious, how much I have learned and grown myself. I'd say in regards to the title, I was really tinkering with something around leading with a lens of inquiry. I wanted to play with that idea. And then I realized that it was really also important to be able to name the thing that this book is about, right? It's evidencing and documentation, and then, of course, connecting that to inquiry. And really, inquiry can feel, as you know, sometimes this really big, ambiguous thing. And how do we unpack it and make it something that we can show and document the process of learning over time? Hence the title there too. So again, following my learners and then not being afraid to name what it is, being a little bit bolder in this publication, I do have to say, which comes, I think, around having a second publication out there. I kind of know the ins and outs of how to write a book and what needs to be said. And then again, just being able to partner with phenomenal educators and leaders, curriculum coordinators, you kind of name it, they're in there, and their feedback has just been really, really pivotal in the putting together what you probably have on your bookshelf.
No, I actually don't. Behind me, I have Leading with a Lens of Inquiry, but I actually haven't got your book yet. So I'm waiting for that to arrive. So I'm waiting for that.
I thought I saw it in the back. I thought I saw it in the back there.
Leading with a Lens of Inquiry is there.
Okay, that's amazing.
But your newest one isn't there. And really the difference was your Leading with a Lens of Inquiry is really more a publication for leaders, wasn't it? To get school leaders on board with evidencing learning and even learning of their own learners, which are the teachers in schools, right? Whereas this book is more, I have been reading up about it and getting all the information. This one is more about actual teachers and educators and how they actually physically use learning walls in their spaces. So I think that's really powerful because I think teachers need as many tools and as many arrows in their little toolkit as they possibly can get. So I think from there, when I go into classrooms, because I do a lot of substitute teaching still, I do see a lot of wonder walls where children's wonderings are. And I actually have made a podcast episode about this because I often think it's where their wanderings go to die, because they put them up there, but then nothing happens. So I guess I want you now, for everybody listening, to explain the difference between a learning wall and what its function is and how teachers actually use it to document and to make learning visible. Because I think it's a powerful tool, but like all tools, unless you use it properly, it doesn't have much value. So, and learning walls are just such a great, powerful, I guess, a visual representation of what's going on in children's minds and in that space. So maybe you can unpack that a lot better than I can for those that are listening.
Yeah, of course. I started with a wonder wall too when I first jumped into the world of inquiry, teaching in an elementary classroom at a PYP school. I had our program of inquiry up there because that was our checklist. We had to have that up there. Then I had my wonder wall because you were supposed to. But just like you said, the wonders just sat there. And then, oh my goodness, it's been 6 weeks and I totally forgot about it. Right. So a common misstep. And I'd say, there's a few things that, with a learning wall look and sound different than some of the classrooms that you've described, or even the very classroom that I had many years ago, and that a learning wall is not static. A learning wall is something that's active, and both the teacher or the educator who's facilitating the learning is utilizing it to be able to document and gather evidence across some sort of time, whatever that learning narrative is. And a learning narrative could be 2 weeks, it could be a term, it could be a whole entire year long. You get to decide and determine what's your intention and what is that learning narrative going to be. Now, I will have to say that as, a school leader, it's okay that your adult learners aren't interacting with it all of the time. The key here, though, is how is it not static? How are you collecting evidence to help you learn about your learners to be able to guide next steps? Same thing for classroom teachers as well. And I'd say that's, a really big difference with a wonder wall. A wonder wall is a really great start. I even actually talk about what a learning wall is and what a learning wall is not in part 1 of the publication. And I do say that a wonder wall is not a learning wall, because a wonder wall is one-noted. It's usually where we'll put up some wonders, they'll hang out there, maybe we'll kind of glance at them. Hopefully not, that's how you're utilizing your wonder wall, but typically that's how they are used. And I find that a learning wall, maybe with a wonder wall near it or kind of part of that process, helps us pull up a chair to the thinking, if you will, to be able to look at the evidence and ask ourselves, where have we come from and where are we going? And what might be some artifacts or evidence or things that my learners need, some universal supports or scaffolds in order for us to get there. And so utilizing, reflective questions like this help us think about the artifacting and evidencing process a little bit differently than perhaps if you have listeners who are at an IB school and have their, PYP wall or their IB wall, which I had an educator playfully just call it IB wallpaper, which I definitely kind of see that there too. And, and I'd say, one more thing just to kind of add to, and I mentioned it kind of briefly, is how might you ask or invite your learners to go use the wall? And if this is not a practice that our learners or ourselves aren't really used to, then how might we think about structures and systems that help our learners see the 4 walls differently? right now, most students probably look at the four walls and be like, well, these are the teachers. These aren't necessarily mine. And just because we point to an anchor chart or we say this is important does not hold the same value as pulling up a chair with our learners or asking our learners to go to the learning wall and grab some evidence to support them while they're engaged in some writing or reflection with a peer. So again, that static is not only in the artifacts moving and changing and ebbing and flowing, but also how are we using them differently than a traditional display or, as you shared before, a wonder wall.
I just had two thoughts as you were talking there. One, in terms of the wonder walls, when I actually had Tanya Gilchrist on the show some months ago, and she was saying
Yeah.
about those wonder questions, which are a great start to inquiry. But then those are often the questions that are very off-piste, so they might be a little bit different to what your curriculum or what you're doing. But they're great questions to give kids agency. So she said you could make some time once a week or however much time you want to spend on it, and then just pull out one or two of those questions. And those kids feel that their questions have been honored, that they have some agency. So I always thought that was a really nice way of actually utilizing your wonder wall. You don't have to answer all the questions, but at least, every week you could address some of them. And the other thing, when you were talking about, how children, and I've experienced this in my class, you've made massive displays, you think it's just a fabulous thing, and kids don't even look at it. And so what I've realized was that, like with all good instruction, you have to explicitly teach kids how to use that display or that learning wall. You've got to physically, well, I can speak only from an elementary point of view, but I found that you have to sort of model how to use it. You've got to model that we're doing this, we're going to put this up. And if you want to know anything, this is where you go look. Or I think you have to be very explicit in your modeling of how to use it, because otherwise children won't. I don't know if that's what you're advocating for when you evidencing and when you're inviting children to interact with the wall. I've always they don't know what they don't know. So you actually have to show them, because sometimes they might think, oh, like you said before, it is the teachers and I can't go there and I can't touch it.
I love that you're lifting that up, Edwina. And no, that doesn't just belong in the elementary space. And that explicit teaching also lives in our middle school or secondary spaces. There's a school in Shanghai, China that I was supporting this year, and they have been focused on authentic documentation. What does that look like and sound like? And that was this barrier that they kept running up against. Well, shouldn't our students know how to go do this already? They're X, Y, or Z age. They said, well, have you showed them? Well, no, not yet. I said, okay, so what are the collaborative structures? What are the routines? How have you baked how you want your learners to be able to interact with the wall into your lesson design? And so that explicit teaching wasn't necessarily a change that they had to do in regards to their lesson planning. And then as they started modeling that, then the students begin to see that, oh, okay, this is a space for me. They begin to flex that agency and utilizing that wall. We model the model, if you will, right? Going up to the wall, pointing to the different artifacts. We're conferring with the student. We can say, hey, come over here. Let's go take a look at a couple of these anchor charts that we created together. How might some of this language help you in what you're working with now? That modeling, that conferring is essential, and it makes me also think of Trevor McKenzie's types of inquiry pool, right? And we're starting with that guided inquiry. It's necessary for that explicit instruction. And as we move across the pool, we'll have learners who are more independent, know what it means to be able to activate that voice and choice and ownership over their learning. And of course, some students get to that deep end and not all, and that's okay too. But are they in the pool, right? Are they engaging with this evidencing process and practice so that they see the value of these resources and they know how to think about them critically to be able to scaffold and support what next steps that they have as it relates to deeper learning and connection making?
I think it's just where inquiry teachers are really different to other teachers. And as you said, I think your enthusiasm as an inquiry teacher has to come through, it has to come through in that, oh, come over, look over this, and come over here and check this out and see if you can add something to this. I think we have to be that, we are the catalyst for inquiry. And I think that if we're just flat, then the learning is flat. And I think that's what makes inquiry really exciting, because it needs enthusiasm. And it's not that, or just go free range, do what you want kind of thing. It's really explicit, and it has lots of modeling in it, because we've got to teach kids the skills, and they don't often have them. So including that skill of how do you go to the learning wall and how to use the learning wall. So that, I think, is super powerful, and a great tip, I think, is that whole model, the model of how you want the children to actually interact and use it. So thanks for that, Jess. Now, I know that there will be educators out there thinking, how do I start? And obviously the first place to start is to get your book. But if they don't have your book, how would you always, or how do you go about when you go into a school and you're trying to get them to use learning walls, how to evidence their students' learning? Where do people start, and how do they go along with that?
Yeah. Starting sometimes is the hardest part, isn't it, Edwina? I'd say, when we build a learning wall, we really have to be intentional, not only the ways that we've outlined already with utilizing it, but what's your intention for documentation? And there's a lot of different choices, which I know might feel really overwhelming for your listeners. Like, just tell me something. Your start could be an essential question that comes straight from your curriculum. I've done that with many teachers who don't really have a lot of agency to move things around in their curriculum. So, okay, let's go take a look here. Where and what might be important that we can directly pull up. So the essential question becomes maybe like the center point of our learning wall. If we're using kind of more of like a spiral diagram, or maybe we use a timeline and we're starting with an essential question and we can move across a wall. I've seen learning walls be able to be used for academic vocabulary, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 vocabulary. But really, how are we inviting? It's not a traditional word wall, remember. How are we inviting our learners to interact with it, add to it, move things around, if you will? So that's, again, straight from your curriculum. A provocation is another great one as well, too, Edwina. If you have maybe a provocation that's a series of photos and you've done a chalk talk, or you've had students say the things that they've noticed and wondered, could you use that as the start? I've seen teachers do that both physically, and then also those of them who have like a panel that they're writing directly on, kind of like a digital panel, and then that becomes their learning wall. So provocations are really great. Student questions are really great. And I'd say, if thinking about the structure of your learning wall is also really essential. You can put a bunch of things up, but that's also might feel really messy and really overwhelming. So one of the structures that I shared is, a spiderweb diagram, or just kind of that traditional like graphic organizer that we use to help students brainstorm ideas. That's a structure we've used in a different setting. Like, let's go use that here. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Use something that they're familiar with. A timeline is another favorite one. I'm a little bit more organic when I build a learning wall, but I also feel really comfortable with it. I find that organic kind of nature helps me be more playful with it. But I also understand that some teachers that feels really messy. So I've also seen like week 1, week 2, week 3, just to be able to have a little bit of that structure. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it's how are you asking your learners to make those connections? And there's on my website, if your listeners jump over there, on the evidence of inquiry page, there's a PDF companion guide that has color images of all of the learning walls that are in the publication. That way you can kind of get a peek at what these look like and sound like. They're not all gold stars, but they are a process. They are a start, and hopefully motivation for other educators or leaders to be able to feel inspired and know where they might begin next.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm just writing that down so that I remember.
Yeah.
I will put that link in the show notes for everybody so that they can go and get that right there. So it sounds to me very much like learning walls also have to mimic your personality. It's not something, or your teaching style, right? It's not a one size fits all. But the most important thing is to just start and start somewhere. I must say, I really am probably quite, I don't know, I think I've changed over the years. I was probably very structured and wanted everything perfect and neat in the beginning of my journey, and then discovered that it's so much more fun just to let it go and to be organic. And I am a very big fan of those spider webs and mind maps, so to speak, because I think
Mhm, mhm,
I just discovered that's how my mind works, and that's how I teach, and that's how I've trained children.
mhm,
So, and
mhm,
that is a favorite strategy anyway, and I think that works just fine. But we all have to find what works for us and what we're comfortable with. You say, you use them as a tool to support reflection and agency and deeper thinking.
mhm. Okay.
I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of educators and think what they would be asking and thinking. How would we use the Wonder Wall to help or assist us in our own assessments? And when it comes to reporting or even meetings with parents or administrators, how would
Mhm,
you say the learning wall is a tool that can easily be used to help us with our
mhm.
assessment of children's abilities and skills? Can educators use it that way?
Yeah, I'd say that baked into this process of collecting evidence is assessment. It's that backwards design. So when I said we set an intention and we're intentional, we should have that backwards design in mind. Now, I will say sometimes I start a learning while I'm not sure where I want to go. That's just kind of tinkering and playing, and that's okay too. But yeah, assessments are part of our day to day. And what does that look like and sound like? There's a secondary teacher who built a learning wall or co-constructed a learning wall alongside his learners, knowing at the very end of a novel study they were going to have to write an essay. So all of the artifacts that were collected across time, whether it be, topic sentences that really captured the students, or some figurative language, or maybe some character description, all those things that he knew they would need to be writing about, he collected some sort of evidence or asked the students, at the end of a chapter to turn and talk with a partner. So guess what happened at the very end of the novel? Well, there was a bunch of evidence on the wall to support them write that essay. And wouldn't you think that they could write much richer and deeper thinking essays because they had that evidence to refer to? So a richer assessment practice because there was formative assessment really mindfully and intentionally baked within his lesson design. And that was in the secondary space. Um, I've seen some elementary teachers and middle school teachers as well utilize a learning wall and then ask and task their students to be able to reflect on a couple of different pieces and parts, some of those coming straight from the curriculum. So, what are some of those standards? And the students have to go find some evidence to be able to speak to that. So a couple of prompts, maybe 3 to 5 prompts. They could use, some types of, apps that they have on their computers or other types of devices. Of course, the teacher can simply pull up a chair and do a little bit conferring, have a 5-minute face-to-face conferring using a little bit of that checklist of things that they have to put in their marking. And I've seen some really amazing early years educators. I know I keep saying pull up a chair because we got to pull up a chair to be able to look at what they've collected across time to do their narrative reporting. And if they've been mindful and intentional, they have the evidence right there to be able to show growth over time or some strengths and stretches within their students. And so those are some of the few things that stand out to me right away, some easy, tangible ones. But again, notice too that backwards design is baked in why we're collecting the evidence and what the evidence might be used for. I'll share one more, especially if you have some school leaders on here who are listening to your podcast, or some coordinators of sorts, have some strategic plans or goals, and that's the framework or that's the start of their learning wall. And so when they add evidence and artifacts up there, those are used as an assessment of whether or not they've met their goal or how they've made progress towards those goals. So again, modeling the model, what we're doing in the classroom is what we should also be doing as leaders. The learning wall that I built last year, we had our strategic goals for 3 years, and we collected evidence across those years, and we're able to really report to our district the ways that we grew over time really authentically and richly. And what was really amazing about having that for us as leaders is when we had parents come in, they could see that we were entrenched in this documentation process and really learning about who we were as a school and how we were trying to get better. And so it really was something that not only helped us kind of check the box, if you will, and also too invited our school community to see school in a different way.
So it really sounds like that if somebody really wants to start dipping their toe into inquiry, which everybody should, if you want to teach
Yeah.
the whole child, I feel really strongly about that. If you're saying that you want to teach the whole child, then you have to be an inquiry educator. But if you want to just start, and that even with that, it's so important, just dip your toe in and have a go. Because one part of inquiry is, of course, the student voice and student agency. And it sounds from what you're
Mhm.
saying that the learning wall is a perfect place if you don't know how to, bring that in for you just to start because, and if you're modeling the model, and I've always
Mhm.
found that when you're learning something new and you share that with students and you tell them that you're both on this learning path, that you're both learning, they really get on board with that. And so I'd say that
Mhm.
if you're just starting out, a learning wall is one of the best tools to use because not only is it going to give children that voice and that agency, but also it's going to get them out of their chairs, out of their seats, and being the kind of learners that they naturally want to be, learning how to use a tool where it's almost metacognition, right? Where they can then see
Mhm.
how they're learning. And that's
Mhm.
very powerful. So I think our message to all educators out there is to get on board. Don't be left behind. If you want to stay ahead of the game and you want to be
Mhm.
advocating 21st century learning, then this is the way to go, people. There really is no other way. Excellent.
Well, it gives us a little bit of the bumper, right? Like when we hear agency, that's big and scary.
Yeah,
We don't do that.
exactly.
When we hear, follow your learners or co-construct, those are big, scary words. And so I'd say, yeah, learning walls are an avenue for that. Thinking routines, of course, do something similar as well, too. And so giving you that pathway forward and then also helping you slow down and make sense of what's happening before you. So you don't have to waste your time on things that don't necessarily matter. And you can really spend time on the things that really do matter and you want your learners to be able to retrieve across time.
Yes, I remember last time you were on the show, you talked about it's stuck in my head ever since you told us how, how this issue with children that they can't connect across subject.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
remember you giving advice about that
Mm.
and how a
Mhm.
learning wall helps you make connections across subject areas because it's not just, okay, this is what you're going to do in literacy and this is your math and this is your um, social studies or whatever it might be, that this learning wall can help you bring in all your subjects and
Mhm.
children to make connections across curriculum areas. So I always thought that that was really powerful because one of the things to obviously see whether children can take the learning and then transfer it to other areas has always been really important. And then sometimes we don't know how to do that. But I think that the learning wall really gives us that opportunity to explore that. So I hope
Mhm.
that's right. Do you agree with that?
Yes, yeah. I'd say that connection making sometimes we'll do with a string physically across the wall, across subject areas. And really when we do that connection making, that's where we get to the deeper learning, right? That's when we're really like synthesizing and making new meaning with the facts and kind of figures that we've heard across time. So I'd say, yeah, learning walls have a way of doing that. I do that constantly. I did today. I have a virtual learning wall that I built across this last year that I've kind of been capturing different projects that I've been working on and being able to zoom in and zoom out helps me see different connections that I might have missed if I didn't necessarily document things in that way. And I'd say the same thing goes for our learners as well, too, of the documentation process.
Mm.
allows it more easily allows learners to be able to see it because we can settle and we can sit in it a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what have
Keeps
you
you in
used for
memory.
your virtual learning wall, Jess?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely favor an in-person learning wall, but sometimes that's kind of what you have. And I also do love the way that I can kind of link things that I'm working on. But virtual learning walls, I love. FigJam is an app that I use. And then I also Miro is another favorite of mine as well too. So those are two that I use a lot. I have also used Padlet.
Oh,
There's a
yes,
sandbox
yes,
feature
yes,
on there.
yes.
Yeah, the sandbox feature allows you to build something a little bit more organic, and I love that for our younger learners because everything is a little bit more contained, if you will. Figma can get a little bit expansive, and it can get easily lost. Um, so those are the ones kind of I favor for now that I've been tinkering with. But there's educators who all the time will see me at conferences or work that I'm doing with their schools and say, "Can I show you what I'm trying now?" So there's always things that kind of bubble up across time. But again, it's an
Mm.
intentionality around the tool. Does it fit? How are you asking your learners to be able to reference it and utilize it? So yeah, not saying no to virtual learning walls. It's just that intentionality around
Mm.
as well too. So, and I'll make sure that I share with you. There's a virtual learning wall resource that I also have linked on that website page too,
Okay.
that has a couple of features, yeah, for teachers to use. Because I didn't want those who maybe that's the only pathway and avenue that they have to say, well, I can't go do that. You
Mm.
know, my thought and feeling about a yeah, but to me, the barrier is the way. And so I don't avoid that. I playfully say, yeah, but okay, let's yes and together. And how might we do that? So there's a virtual learning wall resource that I created that has little like virtual sticky notes and some string, if you will, just like you were saying for that connection piece, some phases of the inquiry cycle, some numbers, and maybe some other playful icons. So we'll make sure that your listeners
Mm.
also have access to that as well.
I do think, though, that in an elementary school, there's nothing better than a physical
Yeah,
learning wall. We need that. But I
agreed.
was just
Yes,
thinking if
agreed.
people are in middle school or high school, and maybe you're an educator that travels. I mean, I've seen
Mhm.
examples that you've done. There are ways to overcome that with big rolls of paper. But if you were a traveling educator, you could have something digitally if you didn't have the space in you borrowing a
Mhm.
classroom, something like that.
Mhm.
So again, there's no barrier, right? We just find a way, a workaround. Jess, your
Yeah.
book is full of real examples
Mhm.
of learning walls. Can you share a favorite moment or story from a classroom that really captures the power of learning walls in action?
I don't know if I can choose one. While I'm kind of, noodling on it, part three of the publication has educators all the way from the early years classroom all the way up to the collegiate level and even some school leaders as well too, talking about their process of building a learning wall. And kind of walking you through their thinking, their missteps, the things that they learn, those aha moments. And so, I definitely tapped on the shoulders of these educators just because I really appreciate their vulnerable sharing and how they were tinkering with maybe an idea that was not really common practice within their school or was just kind of something that was newer for them. So these are definitely a lot of my favorites. I'd say one of my favorites actually comes from an early years educator. She ended up building a learning wall just on that sheet, a roll of butcher paper, for a 2-week unit of inquiry focused on the concept of movement. And I really love how she intentionally not only attached different types of artifacts, even kind of some 3D and tactile ones. But here's the thing, it wasn't the actual building of the learning wall that stands out that it's my favorite. It's because of what happened afterward. So she didn't have a whole lot of wall space. She would unroll this sheet of butcher paper, take new magnets and put it onto her whiteboard and then take it down. And then she ended up just rolling this out and keeping it in a little bit of a bin. And then she collected these across the school year. Well, at the very end of the school year, she had student led conferences. her students who were learning English as a second language, and they now could read and share their own learning journey to their families, and they got to choose which of their learning journeys spoke to them the most. So I'd say that is definitely a favorite just because
Wow.
of that empowering experience for these students who couldn't speak English at the very start of the year, and how they just felt so confident and proud of who they were as a learner, and how they got to participate in this practice that we always, or sometimes I should say, think is for older students. And just that flexibility and that playful mindset and that practice, that explicit teaching that she kept going back to across the year, ended up in such a powerful experience for learners and also for their families as well.
Jess, that's just beautiful. That's almost made me
Mm.
emotional.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Jeez, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Jess, listen, I think it's almost getting time to finish up here. So let's think about wrapping up, and let's finish with, what do you hope teachers take away from Evidence of Inquiry, your latest publication? And how do you see this work transforming classrooms and the culture in classrooms over time?
A great question, Edwina. Gosh, I think that I want educators to feel empowered. I think the same theme ran true with my first publication. I wanted inquiry, and I want inquiry to feel tangible. There, of course, is a depth and complexity to it. I'm still learning so many things, and I've been practicing as an inquiry educator for quite some time. And also, I want everybody to feel like they can take that first step. So I was really adamant with the learning walls that are here to not always be those gold stars, and to have spelling mistakes, and to be these imperfect works of authentic documentation. So that way everybody can see themselves within this publication. And I think that, beyond this, I hope that this is a provocation for educators to think about their documentation practice differently, for school leaders to think about how they're documenting, how they're modeling the model, maybe a little bit differently. And then, of course, there's amazing educators who I'm following with this publication, like Mark Church and Ron Richard and their work with thinking routines. Just, super grateful and honored that Ron wrote an endorsement for the publication and finds such value in the work. And, of course, Kath Murdoch and the work that she's done in schools for so many years. I mean, the list definitely does go on. And so just inviting other educators to, of course, connect with those leaders in this space who maybe they are not familiar with. And then also the amazing educators who are in this book who don't have their own publication, but getting to be inspired by them, reaching out to them and staying connected, and sharing our learning walls in spaces with each other, whether it be on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever it might be, sending them my way so I can share them a little bit more broadly. We really are all better together. And like I said when we started today's podcast, like I have gotten better because of other educators teaching me and tinkering with ideas. And so I hope the conversation doesn't stop after your listeners, finish up this almost 400-page publication. I hope that the continuation of the conversation, is just the beginning, if you will.
Jess, is there another one in the pipeline? Do you have another one up your sleeve?
Uh, Never say never. I do have some ideas, but I'm going to push pause for a little bit. But yes, there will be more sometime. Right now, I'm just savoring and enjoying all that publishing a book brings. So yeah.
Jessica Vance, thank you so much for everything you do for education, especially in the space of inquiry, and your publication, which is now in print. It's a book, it's a physical thing that we can see and hold. And I really encourage everybody out there to go and get it, and to just dip your toe in and have a go, just like all of us have. and it would be the best thing that you've ever done for yourself and your students. So thank you so much for being the lighthouse and for your inspiration to all inquiry educators and actually just to all educators out there. I hope that anybody listening will be inspired to just start this way of learning and teaching, which is just so powerful for our students. Thank you so much for adding to the joy.
You're very kind, Edwina. Thank you for having me. And if you have listened to the end of this podcast, grateful for you all. And yeah, please stay in touch. You can say hello, share your learning wall. And yeah, hopefully I'll get to come back with whatever I have next, Edwina. Thanks again.